stick with us and then we'll cover one another. But in general, all three of us will be speaking. Noah will be flipping through the slides, and Victoria will be in charge of putting people into breakout rooms. All of you are muted, but you can always enter a comment into the chat function. And then there will be a couple times during the presentation where we unmute people for verbal comments. And of course, we'll unmute you for the breakout sessions. Next slide, please. So here's just the timing. So we'll try to finish up this main presentation by 9:40. Then Diane Ifkovic from DEEP will present on the risk map updating in the region, and then we'll go into breakout sessions at 9:50. And then you can let Victoria know in the chat which breakout room you'd like to enter. You can only pick one, unfortunately. But I guess if you have a colleague on the call, maybe the two of you can decide one of you wants to cover snow, one of you wants to cover floods, and maybe that'll be a good way to decide. But we find that the breakout rooms are really helpful. We've gotten a lot of good feedback working with other COGs during the breakout rooms. So we do encourage you to stick around, participate, and don't disappear. Okay, next slide. So we're going to cover the purpose for hazard mitigation planning, review the hazards to be addressed, talk briefly about the effects of climate change that we're required to address by state law. We'll do a quick report out from the meetings that we've had with all of your planning teams. We'll go through some loss estimates, and then we'll have a presentation from Diane about the FEMA map updates in the region, and then we'll end with next steps. Okay, so many of you have seen this slide before. The Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000 is why we are preparing hazard mitigation plans. The act promotes preparedness, and it really aims to have all of us undertake actions to reduce losses from flooding, from high wind events, from earthquakes, from the hazards as they occur. So it's really a loss reduction act. And it enables you to have, if you have a plan, you're allowed to apply for 3 different kinds of mitigation grants. So the current grant programs are flood mitigation assistance, which aims at reducing losses at insurable structures. The hazard mitigation grant program, HMGP, which deals with all kinds of hazards, not just flooding. And then the new program, which replaced PDM, is BRIC, Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities. Many of you have seen a lot of outreach from our state agencies in the past couple of weeks on the BRIC program because applications were due at the end of October. And offline, if all of you could let me know if you applied for a BRIC grant, we're really curious to know, what sort of response occurred. Next slide. A couple snapshots of the top categories of mitigation projects funded by FEMA in the last 2 fiscal years that are complete, so 2018 and 2019. And you can see how the #1 category in 2018, which is acquiring buildings from floodplains, is still pretty high, but slipped to #2, where flood controls went up higher in 2019. That's dams, levees, that sort of thing. Generators, always a popular category, didn't rank in the top 5 categories in 2018, but did in 2019, which is good news for Connecticut. And I think perhaps the best news for Connecticut is that category called utility and infrastructure protection, which ranks higher now than it did previous years. That's a category that's pretty well utilized in this state. Next slide. So here in Connecticut, most initial plans were developed 2005 through 2011. That's also true for all of the NVCOG towns. Local plans are updated every 5 years. So the status, NVCOG is interesting because several different COGs contributed to its formation. So most of the initial plans were developed under contracts to COG CNV, VCOG, and then CCRPA, which has been dissolved. And there were updates to a lot of those plans. Some of them were funded by contracts that the towns held. For example, Waterbury, Watertown, and Southbury all held contracts that were shared with other towns around them. So the current plans were adopted between 2012 and 2016. If you look at the 5-year expiration, you can tell. So some of them have expired already, and some of them will be expiring in 2021. I made reference a few minutes ago to the current grant programs. If you believe that your plan has expired and you applied for a grant, please do reach out to me. Let me know. We can adjust our time frame slightly to accommodate grants that look like they might be going forward. Next slide. So again, we're covering natural hazards. These are extreme natural events that pose a risk and cause losses. Remember, this is a loss reduction act. And what is hazard mitigation? Those are the actions that we can undertake now to reduce losses going forward. So elevating a building so floods don't damage the first floor, or removing a structure from a floodplain. Those are kind of our classic examples of mitigation. Next slide. And Noah, is this where you begin? I believe it is.
Yes, sorry, once I can find my unmute button. So I'm going to run through, what are these natural hazards that are relevant to our region that we're going to be talking about in the hazard mitigation plan. So there's a wide range of them: flooding, hurricanes and tropical storms, summer storms, tornadoes and high winds, severe winter storms, dam failure, wildfire, and earthquakes. And for some of your communities, we'll also be discussing landslides and sinkholes, where we know that this has been a problem in the past. We're also going to be looking at climate change and how climate change is expected to impact the kind of risk profiles in the future for each of these hazards. And just a reminder here, there's a lot of people typing in the chat, so this reminder might not be necessary, but if you, as we talk through these, if you want to type into the chat which of these breakout rooms you want to be in: riverine and dam flood risks, wind, snow, and power outages, or geologic hazards, which include earthquakes, landslides, and sinkholes. So I'm going to run through each of these hazards one at a time and just talk a little bit more about what we're talking about here. So flooding, one of the main types of flooding hazards that we look at is riverine flooding. When rivers overflow their banks, these hazard zones are typically outlined by FEMA floodplain maps. The quality of those maps might depend on where you are, but that's what those maps are trying to capture for the most part. Flash flooding in urban areas, often related to drainage issues, or either undersized drainage or just intense rainstorms that overwhelm the drainage systems that currently exist, and those can cause a lot of minor flooding that can block roads, but also can cause more severe flooding that can actually damage roads, as we see in these pictures from Waterbury. Another type of flooding that we look at in this region is ice jams, where melting ice on rivers flows downstream until some sort of constriction, and then the ice itself forms a dam, and that can cause flooding upstream of the ice dam. It can be particularly problematic because of the ice in the river that can cause damage. The cold weather can cause freezing of the floodwaters, and potentially, if the ice dam were to be breached suddenly, it could cause dam failure type damage downstream with high flows and scour. We're also looking at hurricanes and tropical storms. We have been hit by hurricanes and tropical storms multiple times in the past decades, and despite the fact that we often associate hurricanes and tropical storms with the kind of southeast Atlantic basin, they do come up here and can cause a lot of damages, both from high winds and from flooding. Most recently, tropical storm Isaias caused a lot of damage, primarily due to the high winds from that storm. Summer storms also have high winds, lightning strikes, hail, other types of damages that can take down trees, take out power. Hail can damage property and vehicles. This is an annual occurrence that we know about. Kind of within summer storms, tornadoes and high winds are a particularly severe form of these types of storms, and another hazard that I think often get associated with other parts of the country, but we do have here in Connecticut every summer. I think there's a tornado or two, and in this region we've had tornado impacts in relatively recent years. Severe winter storms. This hazard we are very familiar with. Every winter there's some degree of winter storm damages, from power outages to downed trees to property damage. And then during some of the more severe storms, we can get collapsed roofs. And we've seen this in our region in the past, as well as the traffic accidents and blocked roads that lead to lost business and things like that. Dam failure is a concern. There are many dams in the region, and failure of any of them can cause from minor damage downstream to more severe damages in some urban areas. As far as I'm aware, there haven't been any significant dam failures in recent years in this region, although I think there was a minor one a few years ago. Off the top of my head, I don't know, so I shouldn't say. But there are plenty of dams around, and this picture from the Little River, photo by David Murphy, present, amateur photographer. People don't realize that. So this is not a dam failure, but this is flow over the top of a dam during a high flood event, just to show that we have these dams and they can seem very they able to handle anything, but they do pose risks. Wildfires typically occur at the wildland urban interface, so where you have wooded areas near roads, railroads, or other development, and human activity can cause sparks that create wildfires, and those can cause damage to wildland areas, as well as that fire can spread to developed areas and cause property damage. Earthquakes don't tend to be a significant problem in our area. We do experience earthquakes. They're typically relatively mild. In 2011, there was the 5.8 magnitude earthquake in Virginia that we felt up here in Connecticut. But it's worth keeping earthquakes in mind because due to the fact that they don't happen very often and don't cause a lot of damage, we don't have a lot of regulations protecting from them. And so if there were to be a larger earthquake, it could be a more significant problem. And then the other, what we're calling geologic hazards, are landslides and sinkholes. And we've experienced landslides before that have caused damage to private properties, closed roads, impacted cars, as we see in this photo in the bottom right. So landslides can definitely be an issue in some areas. So those are that's an overview of all the different hazards we'll be looking at. In terms of climate change, there are kind of two categories of the effects of climate change. Temperature increases, global average temperatures are increasing. That's going to affect our growing seasons. It's also going to affect the type of precipitation that we get over the course of the year. So there'll be more rain as opposed to snow as the warm season lengthens. And then there'll also be expected to be, in terms of natural hazards, impacts from heat episodes during extremely hot days in the summertime. And then in terms of precipitation, generally we're expecting more precipitation overall on an annual basis. As I mentioned before, winter precipitation may increase, but because of the temperature changes, it may not be snow, it may be rain during the winter time. And at the same time that there is supposed to be more precipitation, a lot of that precipitation is expected to be kind of concentrated in severe events. And so we'll also be seeing more drought occurrences. So that's my quick overview of all of the hazards that we're looking at, and I'll pass it off to Victoria.
Thank you very much. So now that we've heard a little bit about the hazards, I'm going to give a brief report out on what we've heard so far from all of the municipal meetings. Most everybody, so we've had 15 municipalities that have met with the team, with Dave or Scott primarily. We have one scheduled. We have Prospect coming up just before Thanksgiving, and then we're working to get the remaining towns scheduled, so Middlebury, Plymouth, and Seymour. So just an idea that, we've met with most everybody, so what we're going to hear today from the report out on the next couple slides is coming out of those meetings. So a lot of the topics discussed in the meetings, like you can see, we've talked about critical facilities, standby power, capabilities, risks, as well as, the past storms and occurrences over the past few years, mitigation actions, potential, past, where we stand. So for this report out purposes, Noah, we're going to focus on capabilities and risk, right? So this is really kind of the heart of the plan. So what we've heard from these meetings, next slide, is, some of the changes in capabilities. These aren't all of them. These are some of the ones that we've seen more often, right? There's some specific for each municipality, but overall, everybody's really working on upgrading and improving backup power, whether it's to critical facilities or municipal facilities. We've heard a lot about improving drainage to address those street flooding problems, including some streetscape projects. Tree maintenance, that's always an issue throughout, the region as well as the state. So towns working on increasing tree maintenance budget where possible, or at least maintaining that budget, really kind of taking that head on. Advancing storm response and recovery documentation. I thought this was another great one. So really trying to track what's going on after a response for, for funding purposes. Updating stormwater regulations as well as some other regulations. That's always a great mitigation strategy. Increasing operation redundancies. I think a lot of this came out of the current pandemic as well. So really identifying, backup facility use as well as IT cloud storage. This is great though for other types of events. So really ensuring that you have those redundancies. And then education. So we've seen a lot of mention on education, whether it was for flooding, extreme heat, extreme cold, improving education on websites. So a lot of good capability increases. Also, there's still those lingering challenges. Again, these are some of the more general. There's some, specific concerns in each municipality, but overall still seeing challenges with flooding, whether it's riverine or street flooding, right? Especially some of that poor drainage, particularly during those heavy rainstorms, so some flash floods. Well, we talked a little bit about wildfires. While it's obviously not as huge a concern, there is still worry and some challenges in some parts of the region. Particularly those areas with the larger contiguous forests, 30 to 50 acre parcels. Like I mentioned, trees always a concern, so still an issue during storms. We recently experienced that with SIS, right? So maintenance and during storms, coming down, outages, blocked roads, emergency access, icing and drifting. So again, we see snowstorms not as big as a concern anymore. Most towns seem to say, oh, well, too many snowstorms, or, the snowstorms haven't been too big a concern in the past, but there are still some particular areas of icing and drifting that are a concern, but most towns, municipalities are capable of addressing those snowstorms. And there are some areas of small landslide risks. So landslides, mudslides, rock falls, there are certain areas of concern. So again, these are some of the general findings. There are some more specifics, but just to highlight some of, what's going on throughout the region. So in order to characterize the risk for the region, we want to be able to kind of verbalize that risk. So how do we do that? So one big part is these meetings, these workshops with you folks. We take a look at the state hazard mitigation plan and take a look at the overall risks that are characterized in that plan. We take a look at the FEMA maps, NCDC, which is now the National Centers for Environmental Information, or NCEI, FEMA Public Assistance, National Flood Insurance Program, and repetitive loss properties. So we take all that information, and this is kind of a qualitative description of the risks in the region. But we also want to take a look at the quantitative. So what's at risk, what has been lost, what could potentially be lost. So we use a lot of those resources as well, those same resources, to give a qualitative, a number. It comes down to finances a lot of the time. So how do we quantify that? Again, we use the NCEI, FEMA PA reimbursements, NFIP claims. The State Hazard Mitigation Plan is also a great resource. We downscale that to, county level is lowest scale we can go. HAZUS, and then again, we ask, municipal staff, municipal planners, that if you've had any recent economic losses, any sort of numbers that we can include in the plan, it's a really great tool to kind of make a more robust plan so we can really identify the challenges going on in your community. So to kind of give a quick overview of some of these quantitative losses, we started kind of the background number crunching for the plan. So we want to present some of these preliminary findings. So NCEI, so these are estimates, or this is what's been reported to NCEI. So the numbers aren't 100% accurate. There may have been some injuries or deaths that may not have been reported, but it's still a really great tool to get a pretty good solid idea of, what's been impacting the region. So since 2013, there have been all different types of episodes which fall under the 4 events of flooding, summer storms, thunderstorms, winter storms, or tornadoes. So you could see all the way on the right, those episodes are, they're kind of subcategories of these more major categories. So we could see that summer storms have been kind of the largest impact at just over $1 million worth of cost, with winter storms and tornadoes being kind of second, just around the same. However, more episodes for winter storms, but tornado causing more damage with about $425,000 of loss. And flooding kind of coming in fourth, which is usually a surprise here since we tend to talk about flooding a lot. But again, this is just what's been reported to NCEI. So these are these losses estimated with some injuries and deaths. And again, we take a look at the frequency of the episodes as well. So if we break some of this down, next slide for me, Noah. And then, oh, that's right. So the longer term. So we like to take a look at, the past few years so that we can kind of rule out some of the past major events. And that goes for all of these, estimates and all of these lost numbers. But then we also like to take a look at, longer term patterns. So from 1990 to 2020, so 30-year time frame. Again, we can see that summer storms, thunderstorms still causing the most damage, resulting in the most losses with over $9 million. Winter storms, tornadoes, again, coming in second, 2.5 for winter, 5 for tornado, and then flooding at 135. So it looks like summer storms, winter storms, and tornadoes seem to be impacting the region the most. Again, according to NCEI reporting. Next slide for me, Noah. So again, like I said, we like to break this down and look at the episodes. So in general, we could say these words about these numbers. A flash flood in the region could occur about 12 times a year, while another flood event 4 to 5 times a year. High wind events about 53 days a year, while wintertime wind and storm events about 12 days a year. Heavy snow about 10 to 11 days a year, which I know after hearing some of the reports, it's not always the case, but an extreme heat and extreme cold about 5 to 6 days a year, and then a tornado 1 to 2 times per year. So I think when you look at these numbers coming out of NCEI, we can all say, okay, that sounds about right? I know sitting here this morning, I'm hearing some high winds. So you could see the frequency of some of these events occurring, pretty similarly to what we're experiencing. Then we take a look at the FEMA public assistance reimbursements. Some of the most recent events, the 2015 snowstorm, the 2018 tornadoes, the 2018 flooding, and then as well as Tropical Storm Isaias. We don't have the numbers yet from the 2020 storm. We're on the lookout, so hopefully we'll get those before the final plan. But we also want to take into account the 2020 COVID-19 was a declared disaster under FEMA. However, those numbers are not incorporated into what I'm going to present. And also we're not sure, as we've mentioned in previous meetings, we're not sure what COVID-19, if it will lead to any hazard mitigation funding. We did want to nod that has been a declaration, or it's an emergency declaration. Thank you, Noah. So a little bit of breakdown of the public assistance that's been received throughout the region. So you could see most all municipalities, most all communities in the region have received something since 2013. Most of the funds received have been attributed to winter storms and tornadoes, with I believe only maybe 1 to 2 communities receiving flood and wind money. Some communities haven't received anything, but just to show that most all municipalities have received something from these declarations in recent years. And then taking a look at what type of public assistance. So there's several different types. A majority throughout the region has been, again, since 2013, protective measures and roads and bridges. Those are the most commonly received PA types. But also, for public buildings, state management, debris removal, and recreational and other items as well. So protective measures and roads being the largest issue here. And then I think I have a longer term, so a longer term outlook at the PA. So again, wind kind of taking in the most, wind and snow, and then with tornado and flood. So wind being, it looks like we're, I didn't realize how small my screen was until just now, just about $10 million in wind damages attributed to PA. So definitely an issue in the region. Let's see, I think the next, right, so we have the HAZUS. So we're running HAZUS specifically for the region. However, we don't have the final numbers. So I wanted to take a look at the state hazard mitigation HAZUS numbers and kind of downscale that a little bit since this is part of what we do anyway. So HAZUS is a modeling program. It's used for emergency planning, shelter planning. Utility companies use this for preparedness, and some insurance companies also use it as well. So this is it's a countywide tool. It runs on a countywide. Flooding doesn't include flash flooding, so something, just to keep in mind. And then oftentimes these estimates we do find are pretty synonymous. So again, so coming out of the state hazard mitigation plan, looking at a 100-year flood event, we have Fairfield, Hartford, Litchfield, New Haven counties, which you could see the total losses seem like a lot. But if we were to scale those down on a regional loss, so all the way to the right in that orange column, so Fairfield County for the NVCOG would be about $300 estimated in losses. Hartford, $57,000, and then we have Litchfield and New Haven. Litchfield being about $450,000, and then New Haven $836,000. So again, these are modeled numbers taking into account building as well as contents and business interruption. So a few different aspects of loss going into that calculation. So we also took a look at, next slide for me, Noah, estimated losses from hurricanes as well. So again, we scaled that down from that county level to a regional level. So this regional level is based on population percentage. So the population of NVCOG in Fairfield County, So for a 100-year hurricane event, about 19,000. Hartford, about 39,000 for a 100-year hurricane. Litchfield, about 22,000, and New Haven, about just almost 200,000 in losses. Again, scaled down on a regional level for Naugatuck Valley. And then we also take a look at earthquakes under HAZUS, another hazard. So also what will come out of that, because we don't have those numbers, specifically for the county yet, we do like to take a look at the past occurrences in historic events. So you can see building damages from the 1938, 44, Carol, Donna, Gloria, hurricane damages, not earthquake. We do take a look at earthquake, but this is still hurricanes. So we like to take a look at, the level of destruction that could potentially occur. So you can see that the 38 resulted in some pretty large numbers for building damages, while Donna and Gloria also, some pretty large numbers as well. But again, these are some of the numbers that we'll be modeling and pulling out of HAZUS. Next slide for me, Noah. We also look at NFIP policies. So we take a look at what's in force, how many municipalities have how many policies, how much is covered. And then we also take a look at what's been paid out. So these are the, every municipality in the NVCOG has policies in force with certain coverage. So if you want to bump ahead one for me, Noah. We also take a look at, like I said, how much has been paid out. So we take a look at that in comparison to, how much is in force, right? So we could see some municipalities, Prospect, Seymour, Wolcott, so they have some of the higher numbers of NFIP losses paid. It's also just a really great, it really reiterates the importance of flood insurance as well. So these are some numbers we take into account. Noah, next slide for me. Oh, right. Oh, that's right. That's it. So now I will pass it over to you.
Thanks. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what is at risk and what we're looking at. There's been a few people who have joined as we've been presenting, so I'll just tell the new people, if you've been seeing people in the chat typing their names and then random storm types. The reason for that is that we're going to break out into breakout groups after this. So if you would like to type which breakout room you're interested in, the choices are wind, snow, and power loss related hazards, flood related hazards, or geologic related hazards, including earthquakes, landslides, and sinkholes. Okay. So we know that generally, the built environment is at risk from these different hazard types, including buildings, roads, infrastructure, things like that. We also specifically look at some assets that are particularly at risk, including repetitive loss properties and nearby properties, historic and cultural resources, and critical facilities, which aren't necessarily at greater risk, but they play a critical role, and so we want to make sure that we're aware of that. So we get repetitive loss property data from the state, and we're able to look at that on a town-by-town basis. We're not showing exactly where those are for privacy reasons, but generally we can see where those repetitive loss properties are located. They're generally where you'd expect in areas that are flooded regularly, in areas right along water bodies, things like that. Historic resources pose a particular challenge because of the nature of historic resource designation. Hazard mitigation actions such as floodproofing might interfere with that designation if you alter the building too much. And so maintaining the historic status while protecting those resources is something to consider, and the state of Connecticut has been putting a lot of effort into that. Here on the right for the map of the region, the southern counties, any place where you see kind of the red dots for the most part. These, actually, that's not true. The red dots are everywhere. The green dots or the orange dots, a little bit hard to see on this map. Those areas, Connecticut SHPO has been digitizing the known historic resources into the GIS, and so we're able to map those. For the northern areas and the rest, we're using National Register data, which is in GIS mapped format, and we're able to do some analysis that way of what kind of resources are at risk. But of course, also if you tell us of resources that you know of and where they are and whether they're at risk, then that's also been incorporated into these hazard mitigation plans. Critical facilities, tables of critical facilities were updated during the municipal meetings, or will continue to be updated during the municipal meetings. And the critical facilities include emergency operations centers, emergency response facilities, emergency shelters, other kind of critical municipal buildings like the town hall or other facilities that are critical for continued operations, and then areas that have particular risks or populations at risk. So that might be care facilities, facilities that have populations that with mobility challenges, or just kind of high population centers, if those exist. Sometimes a kind of major apartment complex or something like that will end up on the critical facilities list, and then any other facilities that are critical to emergency response. And that's all I've got.
So Diane, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
Oh, great.
Yes, there you are.
I've been diligently watching.
All right, you've got this floor.
All righty. I think you can go to the next slide, Noah. And you can go to the next one. That's because you know who you are. This slide was more for me. I know you guys all know your region, but I only preface this because the next few slides, and Dave agreed with me the other day, it's a complicated region. We did this for the Housatonic Valley a month or two ago, a very similar presentation, and it was a little more cut and dry. You have 4 counties in all these towns and at least 4 major watersheds. So I want you to keep that in mind as I'm talking, because it can get a little complicated. So go to the next one, Noah. And I try to make it simple as we move on. So just so we know where we came from and where we're going, all the towns in Connecticut participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. We're actually one of the few states that do that. And most of you in this region joined between 78 and 82. The latest one was Bethlehem in 1990, but most of the towns in Connecticut were the same. The program started in 68 and became more mandatory in the 70s. So with that, you each got your own map. Each town got their own map. And some of you are still like that. You have old maps and you don't see any of the borders of your neighboring towns. It all ends at the corporate borders. Very few of you are like that, especially in Litchfield County. So if you're one of those towns and you're like, I have old maps, that's why. So then fast forward a little bit. FEMA stopped doing individual maps. They started to do county-wide maps in the 2000s, 2008 to 2010. So if you're in New Haven County, again, you can see the dates here, but they went county-wide. So what you started to see was maps with aerials, maps where you maybe are sharing a panel with a neighbor, or maybe even a couple neighbors, neighboring towns, because they went to USGS quads. So you to kind of match it up, save money. They made them digital. The whole point was to try to make them easier to update and cheaper to and more consistent nationwide. Again, Litchfield County, there was no countywide update. So if you're in one of these towns, you have your old maps and you're not going to see your neighbors and that kind of thing. The other reason they went to countywide was because again, where towns matched up, sometimes things were in different scales, sometimes there was discrepancies, so it was a way also to get around that and try to make things more seamless, and everybody was on like the same platform. So you'll see map dates. If you're in one of these towns, you'll see map dates like this. Next one, you might see some levy updates if you're in Ansonia and Derby, and I think Seymour also has, like, shares a panel in there when I looked at it. You might see dates in 2013. So then now we're going to skip to watershed. Now FEMA has stopped doing countywide maps. They have decided to do watershed maps from about 2015 onward. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So now you're going to see a whole bunch of watershed projects. There's already one that has been done in the Quinnipiac River watershed. So if you're one of those towns, in that watershed, there's a couple, again, New Haven County, you may have already seen a couple updated maps. So I guess the whole point I'm trying to say here is you're going to see a bunch of different map dates over time. Everybody might be a little different. Don't get scared by that. It makes things more complicated. And it's going to get even more, as you see in a minute. Go ahead, Noah, next one. So right now in this region, Naugatuck Valley, there are 3 mapping watershed projects going. Saugatuck River Watershed, Farmington River Watershed, and the Housatonic River Watershed. Just so you know too, you're not being picked on or anything. There is literally a watershed project that probably touches every part of the state going on right now. Quinnebog, Lower Connecticut, what else out there? Thames. So it's not just in your region. I think we're hitting almost every town in Connecticut in the next number of years, okay? But it's something to be aware of because, and you'll see in a minute why. Go ahead, Noah, next one. So Saugatuck River Watershed. So again, they're looking at a watershed. That watershed comprises of 20 communities. However, there's only one community in the Naugatuck Valley region that's affected. That's Shelton. So if Shelton's on, it's only you for this one little watershed. Your contractor is the USGS. Lucky you, because they're pretty good. Next slide. So this is, again, just a quick thing of what is going on in that watershed. And again, if you're Shelton and you're on the call, you already know some of this. The white stuff is what's happened. The blue at the end that I've highlighted is what's going to happen. So this watershed started a few years ago, as you can see. They start with discovery meetings, which means FEMA looks at their data, they ask the town for data. USGS has done field surveying a couple years ago, and they've been working on what they call work maps. So these are like your first cut preliminary maps that you're going to review at the town level, not for public consumption yet. Those work maps should be coming to you soon. They said they were going to have work map meetings this fall. They pushed them back. Again, if you see a lot of these dates coming up, they're very fluid. A lot of it has to do with the pandemic, obviously. But it's gonna happen. So probably you're gonna get your work maps maybe in the beginning of the year, and then you'll have webinar type meetings like this one with you, hopefully in January, February. If not, maybe in the spring. So keep that in your mind. Shelton, next one. Now we do Farmington. Farmington, again, that's more toward Hartford, and there's 24 communities in that watershed. However, there are 3 that are in this particular planning region, and they are Bristol, Plymouth, and Wolcott. Your mapping contractor is something called Compass. So it's like a private contractor. It just has to do with how the jobs are bid and that kind of stuff. It really makes no difference on what actually transpires in the end. The process is the same, but just so I want to tell you that in case you start getting weird emails from people and you ignore them and they say Compass or something similar to it, be conscious of it. It may not necessarily come from FEMA or from, say, USGS. I only tell you that to pay attention because you don't want to fall asleep. Next one. All right, so this one is actually a little bit further along than the Saugatuck one was. So discovery meetings were held, and you can see what's happened here in 2018. The work map meetings actually for this watershed occurred this summer. There was a kind of general ones in July and then one-on-one community meetings in August. I think Bristol did one of the one-on-one meetings. You didn't have to, it was only if you wanted to. So you should be getting, so in other words, they take all the comments from the towns for those work map meetings when they're issued, and then they incorporate them, and then they give you what they call a preliminary map. And they also just rework everything. So you should probably be getting those in the summer next year, early summer. So say maybe it's May or something like that. But again, summerish time. So again, keep that in mind. The goal here is then to get you what they call a letter of final determination in December of next year. In other words, so they're going to take those maps. Again, you have more time to comment. The public gets to comment. There's an appeal period. It's a long process. As you know, it takes a couple of years. And then with the goal of getting you a final map in 2023. Okay, so again, just again, fluid, keep it in mind, but you're a little bit more, now that you've had those work map meetings, you're a little bit more on the fast track, okay, to getting a final map. But again, it's a couple years away. Next one. All right, Housatonic River Watershed. There's 54 communities total, so a lot of communities above you in the region, so in the Housatonic Valley COG, but every community in the Naugatuck Valley region is in this watershed. So all 19 of you are affected. So as you can see, there's a few of you, Shelton, Bristol, who are in more than one watershed project. So what does that mean? So you're gonna have to go through this more than one time, which can be confusing because you might be, again, that's why I'm telling you who the contractor is, kind of the dates, because you will have different panels being updated. Sometimes it's the same panel or a different part of the panel, and it can get confusing. Go to the next slide. Noah, sorry. All right, so Housatonic is a really big region. As you can see, it's 54 towns. You know, again, a lot of people above you, north of you, a lot of the towns toward the Mass border. It's taken a little longer for this watershed to get going. So they've had some discovery meetings. They've done field surveying. USGS is your contractor, which is good. And they've decided like priority reaches in streams. But again, they haven't gotten farther yet. So I can't really give you a projection. They haven't really given me a projection of when you're actually gonna kind of get work maps or you're gonna get final maps. And again, those kind of start setting up. Once you get that work map, then it starts to kind of accelerate. But I wanted you to know that this is occurring. Again, if you see USGS out there field surveying, sometimes people call and say there's somebody in my yard. They may have to go back out and do field work. I think they're done, but again, you never know. It's a large watershed, so it's been taking a little bit longer than some of the other ones, but it is in process. And once FEMA starts these, they allocate funding, and the goal is to finish it. I've never seen one yet that hasn't been finished. So it's coming, it's just gonna take a little longer, okay? And again, the pandemic, it'll slow things down probably. Next, Noah, thank you. Okay, so you guys already know this, you've been through this, a lot of you have been through this already, especially if you've gotten a county-wide update, which you did in the last number of years. Why do you want to pay attention to this stuff? So again, every town participates in the National Flood Insurance Program. And if you were watching the presentations right before this, they talked about public assistance money and that kind of stuff. Participating in the NFIP, it lets you get disaster assistance. It lets your residents get flood insurance. and which they need to close on mortgages if they're in the floodplain, which is very important right now with all the crazy housing market. So we had a few people in the past, I think Waterbury was one, who didn't make the, when a map is done, you also have to update your ordinance, and you start hearing a lot more correspondence from me, from FEMA. So pay attention. You need to sometimes hit certain milestones and dates. The one is definitely you have to update your ordinance. I send you a very detailed letter on how to do that. Some of you have been through that before. Again, if you're in Litchfield County, you probably haven't been through it. I guess the point is pay attention as people start emailing you or lettering you. We're not doing it to be a pain. We're doing it because we want to make sure, as same thing what this plan is doing is making you eligible for grants. I want to make sure you stay in the program so you can sell houses, so you can access your PA money. You can't win if you don't play, and we want to make sure you are able to play. So that's why it's critical. If you get suspended from the National Flood Insurance Program, it's a pain to get back in. It's a big rigmarole, which I don't really want anyone to have to do right now. So that's what I'm saying. If they want feedback from you, look at maps. Now is your time to get free work out of FEMA and these contractors that have been paid for. If you wait and then you don't pay attention and then there's a mistake after the map goes effective, the town has to pay for it. So I know it's a pain. I know it takes time, but it's important to get that work done by somebody else. So always provide feedback, okay? And then, like I said, the last one there, you're going to be required to update your ordinance. And a lot of you have done this. Again, the Litchfield County towns, is not too many of you. You probably haven't done it in a while. And again, I send you a very detailed letter, the minimum standards that you have to do, and then get it adopted, which again, I know for some people during the pandemic, again, this is years away, so I hope that this will all go away by then and things will be back to normal. But again, when I start telling you that, then that's when you want to pay attention, and we will come after you to make sure you don't slip off the cliff. Okay, so we're not doing it to be pains. We're doing it so you're eligible for everything you can possibly get out of the federal government. Next slide. This is just a quick little thing, just so you know, you probably already know this. The FEMA maps are a snapshot in time. They go from a certain point backward. They don't look forward. They don't do climate change projections, and they don't do any kind of ice jam flooding. Ice jam flooding was an issue north of Umore in Kent and those towns in 2018, but not that it can't occur. So again, if you have those kind of areas, I would highlight those for the hazard mitigation plan, because at least then it's documented. If you have little sections that you feel are prone to ice jam flooding, that can be documented. And I know you guys are going to do climate change. So, and again, it's inland, we don't care, blah, blah, blah. We're not coastal, but you should care in the sense that it does seem that precipitation patterns are changing. We tend to see more droughts, more of these extreme kind of rain bomb situations. So again, if you're seeing that and it's affecting, again, in more hilly terrain, more rural terrain, sometimes you see it, I would again document it in your plan and be conscious of it too. That the FEMA maps aren't taking into account every possible scenario, but you can document it in other ways. Next slide, and I think that's it for me. Yay! Right now, we're all still working remote, as you can probably tell. I'm sitting in my kitchen. Email is the best, I think, for anybody right now at Deep. A few of us are probably field workers, but most people are still, at home. So if you're looking for somebody, first name, last name at ct.gov is the best way to get us at the moment. You can always call, but it just takes a little longer with voicemails and all. And that's it.
Okay, thank you, Diane. So we are going to go into the breakout rooms, and there's been a slight change. There was only one individual that had selected geologic hazards. And so we're going to instead divert more resources to the wind, snow, and power outage room, and Noah and Victoria will both be in that room. and I'll take over the riverine and dam flood risk room, and we will not do the geologic hazards room. Anybody who wants to talk about geology with me afterwards, please feel free to give me a call. Oh wow, that was quick, Noah. Magical PowerPoint skills. So if you've already selected a room, Victoria will start moving you into those rooms. If you have not selected a room, you still can do that by indicating so in the chat. We are on time, so we'll start the breakout sessions right now. And then we had said in the agenda that we'd wrap up at 10:05, but I'm wondering maybe, Noah and Victoria, what do you think? 10 minutes only for the breakout rooms, or should we leave it with 10:05? Opinions?
Oh, I'd leave it till 10:05, I think.
Great.
Okay, that sounds good. So we'll see you all back in the main room at 10:05.
Oh, Dave, what are you doing here?
Noah, you're in flooding. Because didn't I take flooding and you're helping with power?
Yeah, okay, I'll leave. I just clicked the one I was invited to.
Oh, I wonder if she didn't update it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we need your help in power because everyone.
Okay. Bye.
Got a couple.
Victoria, I went to the flooding breakout room. Okay, thanks. Hi, everyone. Great. Looks like we all got in okay. I can't see most of you, but that's okay. If anyone does want to turn on their camera, you know, that you should feel encouraged to do so. So I'll lead us in a little bit of a discussion about the specific types of flooding concerns that people have. I'm just trying to clear things out of my screen so I can actually see you. Okay. So yeah, we can just go kind of popcorn style. If somebody wants to say something, you can unmute yourself and hop in and let us know what you're thinking about in terms of flood hazards. You can also use like the raise hand thing if you want. Actually, I'll start by asking yes or no questions, and you can use the reactions. So if you see the reactions button on the bottom of your screen, can you give a thumbs up if your community is concerned about river-related flooding? Nice. Okay.
I thought this one was the snow one.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I was in the wrong room. Okay. Oh, I just probably sent somebody out into the other room by accident. You're right. This is snow. I was sent to the wrong room before by accident. I ended up in the flood room, and so I got into flooding by accident. Okay. Yes, I apologize. So we're talking about concerns related to wind and snow and power outages. So I'm going to change my question to give the thumbs up if your concern is primarily related to snow. Okay, so we got a couple of snows. So how about give a thumbs up if your concern is primarily related to wind-related hazards. Okay, so some thumbs didn't go up. Give a thumbs up if you're concerned about power outages that aren't related to, oh, now there's more thumbs. Okay, great. That looks like pretty much everybody. Okay, so how about, let's start with wind, since there seem to be a lot of people giving thumbs ups about wind. Does anybody have specific recent events or specific concerns that they're dealing with? And you can just unmute yourself and let us know.
We had issues here in town the last 2 nights.
Okay. What town is that?
Bethlehem.
With power outages?
Yeah, we had one fairly big line that went down for a while and blocked road. We had roads blocked for a couple of days, or at least over 2 days before Eversource got here. And then there was a problem in Watertown that affected some of our residents this morning.
Okay.
Woodbury had the same thing. We had the same line of storms. We had lots of trees and wires down again. We had 1,500 people out, and this is becoming a reoccurring problem here in this area.
Okay.
And in addition to power, cable and phone don't seem to respond very quickly when it's time to put their stuff back up.
Okay.
And Beacon Falls has the same problem, I would say, to probably a lesser degree, but we lost power the last couple of storms too. Wind is an issue.
I don't know if it's the same in other towns, but here in Bethlehem, Eversource owns some of the poles and the phone company owns others. And it doesn't make for very efficient restoration of or changing of poles if necessary. One has to wait for the other and they say, well, it's not ours, it's yours, and it goes back and forth for a while.
Interesting.
I think that's more of a Pura issue than ours. So.
Right. I mean, it's challenging generally to work with the utility companies and get them to make significant changes from the municipal standpoint, we've found. But one of the benefits of coming together as a region is potentially have a little more leverage with them. One thing I'm wondering about is whether, as communities, you know of particular residents or other areas that have like oxygen needs or other power, like emergency power needs that are threatened if the power goes out.
We get that in our town. We got a lot of senior centers that do not have generators, and a lot of them are medical assist. So they only have enough to last them for like 24 hours, and then that becomes an issue.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And some people also had their hands up for snow being an issue. Do any of you guys want to talk about snow related problems? Okay. So what about, I assume the primary issue is high winds damaging trees, falling on power lines. You know, I've been hearing a lot about the emerald ash borer causing, you know, creating a lot of dead trees that are a risk. Have all of you seen that, or are there other issues around trees that are causing this or impacting this problem?
Well, one of the issues is that we can't take trees down that are close to the wires. And sometimes either the phone company or Eversource don't think they're dangerous enough for them to take down. So we wait for it to fall and take the wires down or block the road.
Okay. And have any of you had any successes at mitigating any of these power loss issues?
You mean prevent them?
Yeah, yeah. You know, finding ways of improving tree maintenance budgets or installing backup power, things like that you found to be effective.
I know Eversource, this is Jack from Cheshire. Eversource has done quite a bit of tree cutting on the main lines, and we've also provided generation at 2 of our larger buildings, so it's minimized the impact a little bit.
No, this is Steve from Southbury. I know our public works department has is out almost every day, trimming trees and taking down ones that they possibly can. And I think part of that comes through, they can only go up so far and so close to those power lines anyway. But we have a pretty good public works crew that goes out and does that on a daily basis.
Great. How about road blockages and debris management? Is that a challenge for any of you?
Only until Eversource makes it safe.
Right, okay. Okay, but other than that, so it doesn't seem like, seems like power outage is the main concern related to wind and snow events, blocked roads from downed trees, or debris management or snow management has not been particularly an issue. You're all able to manage that.
This is John from Southbury.
Thanks,
The biggest
Jack.
problem that I see, we've gone through the tornadoes, we've gotten hit with the August storms. The biggest issues that you have is getting Eversource teamed up with the public works crews to go out together to make it safe and then open it up. We're sometimes limited for the first day or two until they actually get out there and start teaming up with us. That's the biggest hindrance that I've seen. Once they're paired with us, then things start moving.
I'd like to echo the previous comments. Once we, here in Beacon Falls, when there's no power lines involved, the public works teams get out there, they clear the roads, and then it seems that it's a waiting game for Eversource to come out and to clear the lines. But if it's just our responsibility, we seem to be okay. It's when we have to rely on outside, Eversource to be with the crews, then once they're with us, it goes pretty quick, but it's just getting them here and deeming the road that's actually closed as a priority road is, that we can deem them as priority 1 to however they do it with the EMDs and the public works. But, it's a waiting game, and sometimes that waiting game can be very frustrating.
Okay.
I think you're going to see that across the region. And if Eversource would finally get it through their head to embed crews within municipalities, things would change significantly.
Okay.
I don't know if it's a trust issue when it comes to the utility companies, but their utter lack of communication with us about what they're doing and where their crews are.
100%. That's they do not communicate well.
Sorry to the people in my room who were in the middle of a sentence.
Yeah, we had one as well. That was faster than I thought. It was. I was sad to come back.
I'm also sorry. I meant to broadcast a message. I thought it would let me time it down, and then it instantly closed, and I panicked trying to stop it. So I do apologize for the abrupt room closure without even a minute notice there.
Well, we can, Victoria, know when each of us does a report out, we can let the person we can finish their sentence for them or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll go first, I guess, with the flooding. So we had a good discussion. Seemed very brief. We initially were talking about Diane's presentation and the math updates and how it's a great opportunity for people to really dig in and maybe get some of the A zones mapped with an elevation for free. The consultant that FEMA has would be doing that work. And so Mark Aragus from Wolcott, for example, is going to be contacting Diane immediately to see if she knows if some of those A zones are being addressed. We also talked a little bit about acquisitions and barriers to acquiring properties in floodplains, specifically in context to the Housatonic River, but also, the discussion is applicable to all the towns. Talked about a critical facility in Oxford, which was possibly going to be addressed with a culvert replacement under HMGP, which didn't happen. So we want to make sure that gets into the annex. And then we were ending with Waterbury. Bob had asked participants for their thoughts on how other towns are addressing drainage from redevelopment or development projects. What percent of the storm has to be retained on site. And Mark Aragus was mid-sentence with what Wolcott is doing. And so it sounds like Wolcott is requiring 100% of large storms to be retained on site. And we didn't have a chance for any other towns to respond, but it seems like something that we could definitely follow up with in future meetings if we have time. And which one of you wants to jump in next?
I can jump in. So we started off our discussion also about floods because I got confused. Apologies. So we, talking about wind, snow, and power outage related hazards. A few people were concerned about snow, but the main issue appeared to be wind related power outages. Towns are able to deal with downed trees on roads and snow and debris and clearing things and maintaining trees on their own. But there's a lot of feedback related to challenges having to work with and wait for the power utilities. Eversource, I think, covers everyone. Waiting for them to show up and make safe and deal with things on their end so that the towns can get to work. At the very end, David Lenart and Janet Morgan were both commenting on an issue with lack of communication from Eversource about what their plans are and what their schedules are. And Janet was in the middle of a word when we disappeared. So, but I think it was expressing frustration with many other people about having to wait for Eversource and challenges with communication with Eversource. So that's what we talked about.
I'm good. I do not.
Okay. All right. So can we just unmute everybody and then we'll just sort of have a group wrap up, take open-ended comments and
right. Everyone should be able to. Yep. Everyone should be able to unmute. So if you have anything else to add, definitely we can take that.
And I don't know if Janet or David wanted to kind of finish their sentences.
And Aaron, if you want to say anything, go ahead.
I just finishing what we were talking about, the recent storms and then the gas situation that we recently had in the Derby and Sony area. Eversource was running to the beat of their own drum without sharing any information, and it leads to just frustration because we're being bombarded by our citizens about information, and we can't get any information out of Eversource, even though they're literally sitting right next to us. So again, it's just a communication issue from the utility companies as to what their plan is and what they're doing.
We hear that a lot, unfortunately. Anyone else? No?
You want to bring up the next step slide?
Oh, yeah. Let me get that up. Wait a minute. Oops. Okay. Can everyone see my next steps screen?
Yes.
Dave, you want to tell us the next steps?
Oh, that's me. Okay. Spacing out here. So we have a couple of towns left to meet with, and if I have reached out to you and we've already scheduled something very good, if I'm waiting to hear from you, please get back to me or Scott Bignatti. Scott is actually handling most of the meetings. I've handled a couple of them, but we need to meet with Middlebury, Seymour, and Plymouth, I believe, still, and Prospect is already scheduled for next week. Review the meeting minutes as we distribute them. We find that the best time to look at them is right when you get them. We try to get them out within 24 to 48 hours, and we've basically been sticking to that, but memories fade kind of as time goes on. Public involvement opportunities are open. There's a survey. You can take the survey even though you're directly involved, and you can share it with whomever you'd like. There's a story map. Lower right-hand corner is a view of that. We've got public meetings that we'll be undertaking. Here's a change. So Aaron Boudris and I talked about kind of the general public meetings are not well attended in the other COGs where we're doing this. We were thinking about, first of all, there's one tonight. So this presentation tonight for the public will still happen. But after that, we might take some of the resources that we have in our contract for public meetings and instead do short presentations at existing standing meetings, planning and zoning, wetlands, etc. So it would be a way of reaching out to people that is kind of a captive audience. And to the extent that members of the public are in those meetings, are always invited to them, they would kind of become another way to engage the public. We would still have the story map, we'd still have the survey, we still would have a couple of virtual public meetings, but this would be another way to kind of get in front of the public. So that idea needs to be further developed. If you're hearing me say this and you have a really good idea for which commission or committee in your town should be engaged, just let us know. If we hear nothing from you, we'll probably reach out to planning, zoning, or combined planning zoning as the first start. And then we'll have another workshop with all of you here later on this winter to talk about mitigation actions and the types of actions coming from the state that we're going to push down into the plan. And that's it. And I think we are done in 1 minute. I can't believe we made it on time, guys. Congratulations to everybody on the call. You all participated in keeping us on track. And please stay in touch with us. And if you have any final comments, right now is a good time.
Thank you.
Dave, it's Mark Argus. You talk about using the public output to the planning and zoning or wetlands. Currently, WOC is going back to doing Zoom meetings or whatever, but town council meetings are televised, so you'd have it all over town if you had a short term during that, at least in WOC.
That's a great idea. I'll contact them. I don't know
how many people, unless you got something interesting you watch it on TV, but I don't know what the audience is. I can double check, but I think that might work out well.
Great, thank you. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.